Hi! Welcome to this part of my review featuring Heroes and Hardships, the core rulebook. This is the early access version. If you haven't seen the other parts of my review featuring this universal RPG system, please check out the playlist in the description below. This time we are going to talk about ranged combat, wounds and injuries, and mental combat. Remember to check out the links in the description that will take you to the Kickstarter that is ongoing and it is currently in its stretch goals. You'll also find links to the website, to the Tetsubo section of the website. Tetsubo is an upcoming setting inspired by Japan's Sengoku era. You're also going to find links to the Discord, to my reviews of the Quickstart guide, and the Wallace campaign setting, based on the life and exploits of William Wallace. So please check it out. Now let's continue. Ranged combat is almost the same as melee combat, except that most ranged attacks cannot be actively defended. This means that in most cases a defender cannot use a defensive action to defend the attack. Each ranged weapon has a certain median range. The distance from attacker to defender will fall into a specific range band, which is calculated based on the weapon's base range. Instead of the defender choosing a defensive action, calculate the range band of the attack instead. Many range bands introduce range dice. Range dice are a type of penalty dice and work the same way. Range dice are added to the target's base defense to determine the BDV or base defense value of the target. You follow the rules in each band listed accordingly, applying bonuses or penalties depending on the distance between you and the target. It's important to note that there are certain defensive items that allow the defender to choose a defensive action against ranged attacks. Typically, this is not allowed, but some items like shields can supersede this rule. Items with the shield quality allow a defensive action to be used against ranged attacks. When using a defensive action against a ranged attack, any skill check replaces the defender's base defense. However, all range bands are still added to the skill check to form the base defense value. There are times when the arrangement of certain characters impact shots fired at a target. For example, shooting into melee. This rule allows the game master to penalize shooters that fire into melee combat. So you may end up hitting someone in the melee that is not your original target. Shooting through allies and enemies is difficult. This puts another penalty on your shot. Let's talk about cover impediments. Characters can take cover from ranged attacks or, in some cases, at the game master's discretion, melee attacks. Cover impediments are cumulative. This means if multiple sources apply cover impediments, you add the cover impediment ranks and use the penalty of the total ranks. So ranged combat is quite simple. First, the attacker selects an action. Then the attacker makes a skill check. Next, you determine hit location. Next, you check base defense. You determine range band. The defender determines the ranged target number. You compare the base attack value and the base defense value, and you add post-roll modifiers. Now, let's talk about wounds and injuries. These are the main factor in judging the overall health of a character. There are no hit points in Heroes and Hardships, as mentioned in a previous part of the review. Each wound and injury is listed separately. Wounds are tracked based on the hit location where it is taken. Whenever a character takes a strike that causes a total success value greater than 0, the target may take an injury or wound. Wounds and injuries are cumulative during combat. When a character takes a wound or injury, the hardship or pre-roll modifier applies to all skill checks unless stated otherwise. A wound is taken if the total success value meets or exceeds the wound level of a target. The wound level is calculated by the following equation: 4 plus power level plus strength plus endurance plus willpower plus resilience. A wound confers a single hardship. This hardship is removed after the encounter if there is a reasonable time to rest afterwards. Combat encounters that occur back-to-back should allow for the hardship to linger. When a character takes a wound, the player should track it on the wounds section of the character sheet. Make sure to track the location and total success value of the wound. The player adds all wounds together up to their wound threshold to calculate their total wound hardship. A character can take only so many wounds before falling in battle. Sometimes the accumulation of wounds is as bad as suffering a mighty blow. When a character's total wound hardship exceeds their wound threshold, the player must make a death roll. If they fail the death roll, the character dies immediately from the accumulation of their wounds. If they succeed, the wound hardship is not added. The actual wound is still tracked as normal with the total success value and hit location. In this scenario, the character takes an injury instead of a wound hardship. This injury acts like any other injury with appropriate penalties applied. Wound threshold only tracks current wound hardships. Previous wounds suffered do not count against the wound threshold. Any further wounds will trigger this process again. A character's wound threshold is 2. If a character suffers total success value equal to or greater than their mortality threshold, they must perform a death roll or die immediately. The mortality threshold is calculated by the following equation: wound level multiplied by 2. If the death roll succeeds, the character takes wounds as normal. If the total success value of any attack is ever double the character's mortality threshold, they die immediately without a death roll. Death rolls may be rolled under several circumstances. Failing a death roll causes the immediate death of the character. Characters make a resilience skill check and add their wound level as a pre-roll modifier. The target number of the death roll is the target success value of the attack, or the levels of success from any source that caused the wound. Wound hardships and injury pre-roll modifiers are never calculated in death rolls. However, previously sustained wound defects may impact this roll, as they are neither wound hardships or injury pre-roll modifiers. If the character meets or exceeds the target number, they have cheated death. If not, they die. If multiple death rolls would be triggered in response to any one attack, only make the roll once. Consider all other death rolls successful and follow all other rules associated with those rolls as normal. There are various optional alternate death roll rules. Death rolls can be made to be more or less deadly. Game masters are encouraged to use these alternate rules if it suits their game. For example, if you want more dangerous death rolls, alter death rolls so that they do not add the character's wound level as a pre-roll modifier. If you want less dangerous death rolls, alter death rolls so that they add the character's wound level multiplied by 2 as a pre-roll modifier. Now, when it comes to falter rolls, taking wounds can cause you to become stunned and fall unconscious before you expire. Use falter rolls for both physical and mental wounds. If you suffer a wound or would suffer a wound but cannot due to wounds being greater than wound threshold, make a hard stamina skill check plus wound level as a pre-roll modifier. This is called a falter roll. If you succeed, you are able to come to your senses and you act as normal. If you fail, you falter. Drop anything you have in hand, fall prone, and you become helpless. If attacked while helpless, attacks are defended by your base defense only. Unlike death rolls, falter rolls always include wound hardships and injuries when factoring penalty dice. You remain helpless for AP equal to your current wound hardships multiplied by 5. When it comes to injuries, an injury is taken if the total success value meets or exceeds the target's injury level, but does not meet or exceed the wound level of the target. The injury level is calculated by the following equation: wound level divided by 2. Most attacks will cause an injury as injury levels are low. Only the toughest character can fight through attacks that bypass their armor. If an attack does not meet the injury level of the target, the attack does not harm the target in any way. This can be narratively described as armor soaking the wound, a minor scratch, etc. An injury confers a -3 pre-roll modifier per injury. The injury is removed after the encounter if there is a reasonable time to rest afterward. Combat encounters that occur back-to-back should allow for the injury to linger. Specific injuries are not tracked per location and do not need to be healed after a combat has concluded. There is no limit to the number of injuries taken during combat. Now, when it comes to mental combat, some combat options target a person's mind and not their body. This is considered mental combat. Mental combat works alongside personal combat seamlessly. Mental attacks can be hazards, manifestations, or other special maneuvers. The total of these are considered the base attack value of the attack. These attacks always have a resistance listed, and by default this should be a courage skill check, if not stated otherwise. A defender makes a courage skill check, and the total is their base defense value. Subtract the base defense value from the base attack value for the base success value as normal. If there are post-roll modifiers, apply those and calculate the total success value. Skill checks made to resist mental attacks never cost APs or require an action. In some cases, mental defense can be used instead, as if it were the base defense in a normal attack. Now, when it comes to mental characteristics, these are similar to those used in personal combat. Characters that suffer a mental attack equal to their fear level, but not equal to their terror level, suffer a fear. Fears confer an injury to the character. The character's terror level is equivalent to wound level. A character taking a mental attack with a total success value over or equal to the terror level will give them a wound hardship, and counts against their wound threshold. Characters must take a falter roll as usual, but this should be stylized as a mental breakdown instead of a physical injury. If the total success value is greater than the character's insanity threshold, they immediately make an insanity roll or permanently lose themselves into psychosis. This has the same result as character death, and the character must be retired. If the total success value is ever double the character's insanity threshold, they immediately go insane. Insanity rolls are similar to mortality rolls, but include some differences. Insanity rolls must be greater than the total success value of mental wounds that are greater than a character's insanity threshold. When making insanity rolls, make a courage skill check and add the character's terror level as a pre-roll modifier. If the roll is greater than the total success value of the mental wound, the roll is successful. Do not apply wound hardships or injuries to this roll. If they fail, the character immediately becomes unplayable due to a mental breakdown. And it's great that in this particular subsection of the book, you have a complete combat example. This concludes this part of the review. In the next part, we are going to talk about wound effects, healing, and combat actions. So you can appreciate how the system is quite integrated. Ranged attacks feel like melee attacks. The mental and physical wounds feel somewhat similar as well. And because there are optional rules and variations, you can make this wound system as lethal or as over the top as you want it to be. Thank you for watching this part of the review, and thank you for your likes and your comments. If you have any questions or comments, please let me know. And thank you so much to those of you that are going the extra mile to support the channel. If anyone else wishes to further support the channel, the information on how to do that will be in the description below. Once again, thank you, and see you later.